Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. Mars makes it as easy as possible for you to get your pharmaceutical, medtech, or digital health product to the market and, of course, get the price it deserves. My name is Stefan Walzer. I'm the founder of Mars and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics already since 2004. Additionally, I founded the consultancy P&N Pricing and Negotiations in Healthcare based in Toronto, Canada, which supports companies and individuals globally by coaching, simulations, and training, especially on negotiations. This service is including our innovative virtual reality simulation program and is part of the Negotiation Lab. And now let's learn about the market access and reimbursement systems around the globe. Okay, very good. So thanks a lot to Jürgen Wasem. Thanks a lot to Essen. We have one of a key expert in terms of the German healthcare system today with us. And the core question, the core discussion for today will be around the so-called evaluation committee. But before we start, Jürgen, maybe you can as well quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. For my main job, I'm professor for health services management at University Duisburg-Essen. And I'm involved in the German healthcare systems for many years, especially in arbitration functions. I had been chair of the AMNOG Drug Price Arbitration Board for a number of years. And since many years, since 15 years, I'm the chairperson of the arbitration board of the evaluation committee, about which we will speak today. And since a number of years, I'm also the chairperson of the arbitration board regarding prices for digital health appliances. Well, I think that's enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you had a lot of more experiences and functions in as well in the past. But as you said, I think the core and most important kind of function you have just mentioned today, as we've both now said, I think the focus should and will be on the so-called evaluation committee. We have a lot of non-Germans as well listening to the podcast. So maybe you could firstly start explaining a bit what the role and the function of the evaluation committee in German, it's the Bewertungsausschuss, really is.
Yeah, maybe one general sentence to start with. In Germany, unlike in many other countries, outpatient physician care is primarily done in an office-based setting. More than 80% of all services are provided in office-based centers, which may be small practices, but also large centers with a number of physicians in. And the evaluation board is setting the fee schedule for these services. One of the general features of the German healthcare system is that the government itself mostly does not directly intervene, but sets a legal framework. And regarding the fee schedule of the office-based physicians, the law says that the evaluation committee is doing the fee schedule and some other decisions related with honorarium of office-based physicians. The evaluation board itself is parity with physicians and payers, with sickness funds. So the board itself, it actually has 6 members, 3 from the payer side, the sickness fund side, and 3 from the Federal Association of office-based physicians. They have monthly meetings, and there they develop the fee schedule. And actually, if they do not agree, which happens, let's say 5 times a year, then the arbitration board has to take place, which then adds to the 6 persons 3 neutral members, among me as a chairperson.
Very good, very good. So, I mean, as you already said, I think we're active today in the outpatient setting. And I think before we maybe move a bit more into, let's say, the direction of diagnostics in the outpatient setting, which I think is also one of the potential ways where the evaluation committee would basically decide on. I think you have just mentioned that the evaluation committee is also deciding on the so-called fee schedules. And I guess also on the, updates, meaning inclusion changes within that kind of schedule. What are the core drivers for such a kind of update? Is that maybe that somebody's initiating it, or is that more on an annual basis that you simply check the real resources which are needed, or how could we really think about that?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, we have the costing issue. So what's the correct price for a given fee schedule position? And there, of course, basically developments in costs are main issue. So if technical developments lead to new resource prices, then this will be reflected in the fee schedule. And actually, partly this is done on a smoothly, continuously process, but every number of years, every 5 to 8 years, there will be a major reform where they actually look on the prices. Among others, one key thing which then has to be discussed always is the fee schedule position basically consists of two parts. The one is the technical costs, and the other is paying for the working time of the physician, and this has to be balanced every number of years again. So which means mostly that fee schedule positions which have a large share of physicians' time has to be increased in relation to fee schedule positions which have a large share of technical costs, because mostly the technical costs don't rise that much than labor costs rise. So that's the one thing, costing information. And the second thing is, of course, do what developments in medicine require adjustments with regard to the contents. Therefore, a given fee schedule position does no longer describe adequately what's done in medicine, or it's totally irrelevant and we need new fee schedule positions.
Yeah, exactly. I think you mentioned already a very important component, which is then the technical bit, right? And I think one of those kind of technical components could also be, for example, a new diagnostic. So how would such a process basically look like if a company would basically say, look, we have maybe new diagnostic, and I think we have spoken also in other instances that maybe the evaluation committee is maybe not the only kind of path then into, let's say, the reimbursement for such a kind of diagnostic. But how would that basically generally look like if we would assume this could go through the evaluation committee?
Well, first of all, there is a clear distinction if you talk about a companion diagnostic to a drug or to a more predictive general type of diagnostic. Because for a companion diagnostic, the law, the social health insurance law, requires a tight schedule that routinely, when a new drug comes to the German market, the evaluation board checks whether a companion diagnostic is included in the label. And if the label requires a companion diagnostic, then within 6 months, the evaluation board must adjust the fee schedule so that this companion diagnostic can be done as a social health insurance service. Often, the new products have companion diagnostics which are already in the fee schedule, but at least 4 or 5 times a year there are companion diagnostics which are not in the fee schedule, and up to now. And then we have a routine process that within a half a year we come to a fee schedule position for this companion diagnostic, so that latest 6 months after launch of the product, really the physicians can do this diagnostic in order to see whether their patients qualify for the drug. So this is the one category, the companion diagnostics. For the other thing, it's much less rigid and much less straightforward regulated. If there is a new diagnostic which is not a companion diagnostic, then basically we have to decide first, or to look first, whether it's a new scientific method. Because if it's a new scientific method, then the law says clearly that GBA first has to do a benefit assessment of this diagnostic. And only if the benefit assessment of this diagnostic comes to a positive result, then the evaluation board is entitled, but then also mandated to do a new fee schedule position. Therefore, the central question then is there's a new diagnostic tool. Is it just a slight variation of something which already exists? Then the board would do adjustment of the fee schedule, or is it really a new scientific method, a new medical approach how to diagnose? Then the first step is not in the evaluation board, but the first step is in GBA, who is requested then by law to do a benefit assessment. Actually, the manufacturers of diagnostics are entitled to ask GBA and the evaluation board what's their opinion about whether something is a new scientific method or not. And they both have to come to agreement on this. And this actually is done not very often, but several times a year. We get requests by manufacturers which have new diagnostics and who want to know, is this a new scientific method, which means that we have to go through GBA evaluation first, or is it just a slight variation of an existing method which already is in the fee schedule? Then we only have to adjust potentially a fee schedule position.
Okay, perfect. I think two maybe further questions around it. I think first thing, I think you mentioned the companion diagnostic in the 6-month kind of time period. That was my understanding, is basically that within those 6 months, also the changes would need to be, let's say, already implemented within the fee schedule, right? It's not just the decision making within the evaluation committee, correct?
Well, the evaluation committee has 6 months to adjust the fee schedule. Therefore, after 6 months, in the last few days of the 6 months period, the decision should be done. So that in the beginning of month 7, the fee schedule should be adjusted. And actually that works. I mentioned that we meet monthly in the evaluation committee. I think 10 meetings a year. I think there is a vacancy period of 2 times, but in principle there is a monthly meeting. And it's always on the agenda, there's always routinely on the agenda after opening the discussion and going through the minutes of the last meeting, always the first point then is, do we have to do with new fee schedule positions because of companion diagnostics? Because there is a very straightforward legal obligation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it really works well. I mentioned that I'm the chairperson of the arbitration board, of the fee schedule, of the evaluation board. We never had the arbitration board necessary for this type of decision, because that always works very smoothly, that they come to the conclusion we need a new fee schedule position. And up till now, there also was always consensus on what is a fair price to put into the fee schedule for this companion diagnostic.
Very good, very good. That's really good to hear. And then, I mean, you mentioned, let's say, the two kind of, let's say, paths for otherwise, let's say, for predictive diagnostics, right? One is the evaluation committee, or, I mean, if it's new innovative, then it's the benefit assessment through the GBA. When we move a bit, let's say, from a procedure perspective forward, which are the kind of key evidence requirements, and do they maybe differ between the two kind of pathways when thinking about a predictive diagnostic? Meaning, is always, for example, a randomized controlled trial? And if so, or if not, which kind of endpoints might be, let's say, discussed within the different kind of paths?
Yeah, I mean, that's very clearly in the if we talk about a new scientific method, then rigid GBA thinking about a benefit assessment applies, which means that we need basically an RCT, and basically also the data shall not be limited to sensitivity and specificity of the test, but really the crucial question is, what's the benefit of this diagnostic regarding the final treatment and outcome of the patients? Therefore, actually, they will not stop with looking at, is the test in itself good from the sensitivity specificity, but what's the impact of the test on treatment actually? Therefore, if there would be no consequence, if we have a better test, but there is no consequence with regard to treatment, then this it's unlikely that GBA would see a reason to give a positive decision on this test. That's of course much more reduced if we talk about a test which is not a new scientific method, but just a slight adaptation of what we already have, because then the principal proof that this method works and has benefit for the patient has already been done in an earlier GBA decision. Then we basically talk about, is the test at least as efficacious as the existing ones with regard to sensitivity, specificity, etc. And also, of course, then issues of costs come into the game. So if it's the same efficacy but just more expensive, then it's a more difficult story than if we talk about a more precise test with only limited increase in costs.
Yeah. A question we get as well a lot of times, especially from diagnostic companies, is, when you basically fill out the document, the request for a change for the evaluation committee with all of the information for that, let's maybe call it adapted diagnostic, and they enter their kind of, let's say, price / the cost for that adapted technology. I mean, how does that, let's say, get into the discussion within the evaluation committee? So how would the evaluation committee take an information which is maybe price on one side, but obviously as well the time for the physicians or maybe for nurses, etc., into a final decision for an updated or maybe a new kind of fee within the fee schedule? I mean, are there any drivers? Is the price simply taken, or is that maybe weighted? What is the thinking behind that?
Well, with regard to the physicians, first of all, I should mention that the evaluation board does have a institute to support itself. It's the Institute of the Evaluation Board. It's a institution of about 60 people. And one of their key tasks is to check the validity of such statements and to do market research. And one of the things which they do is try to estimate whether these data on physicians' time, blah, 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 are valid. And also what is the expected reaction in the market to prices which would be imputed in the fee schedule. Therefore, we do not take these figures as given, which are submitted by the manufacturer, but we do our validation check. And of course, one of the ideas which we have is how will the manufacturers react if we put in the fee schedule position a lower price than actually they stated? Because often our finding is that if they, let's say, write in their claims that the market price is 80 euro for a test, then we think, well, what's happening if we write 60 euros in the fee schedule? Is it likely that they don't lower their price? And if we come to the idea, no, it's not likely that they will not lower the price, then it is likely that we will only write 60 euros into the fee schedule. Therefore, the idea is we offer here a big market for 70 million euro German patients. And therefore, we think that there definitely is some price sensitivity with regard to the manufacturers in comparing to a situation before it was funded by social health insurance, where it was basically only available for people who pay themselves these services, or for those 10% of the German population who are privately insured. Therefore, knowing that we open a market with the fee schedule decision, we open the market for 70 million euro German insured, there is the assumption that there is some price sensitivity with the manufacturer.
Yeah, exactly. So have you ever had the experience, or maybe you have seen it just generally, that there was a new fee schedule decided on by the evaluation committee and the manufacturer has suddenly decided not to launch the product?
I can't remember that these things happened since I'm in it. I'm in it since 2007, and I can't remember this have happened.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was also not able to identify an example, but maybe, I think maybe you could come up with.
Sometimes we really have big discussions. The biggest discussions we had on COVID tests, where the manufacturers threatened they would not be willing to deliver the tests, but we knew that this was bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you just bring up a good point. I mean, you discussed. So meaning, let's say from a procedural perspective further on, right? I mean, that's a submission, you have the internal kind of discussions and the workaround, including the institute, etc. Then you're coming up with a with, let's say, a kind of proposal, right, for an update of the fee schedule. And then this is communicated firstly to the manufacturer, or is that then directly basically further, let's say, pushed into the final decision making, I guess, then by the GBA in order to adapt and finally change the fee schedule? What are the steps afterwards?
Well, I guess that there are some informal contacts to the manufacturer, but formally it's going through a working group within the evaluation committee. Then it goes into a group which is preparing the meetings of the evaluation board. They always meet 1 week before the evaluation board, and then it goes into the meeting of the evaluation board, and there it may be that there is no need to discuss at all, then it will be 10 seconds on the agenda, but it also may be very controversial. I mean, the usual position, or no, not the usual, but not seldomly payers want to pay less than physicians think should be written into the fee schedule, which is not only related to the technical costs, but also to the payment of the working time of the physician, so who is doing the test. Therefore, there are not often, but there happens several times a year that we have really controversial discussions, and then they try to find a compromise maybe between these two different positions, and if they don't manage, then they decide that I should decide.
Yeah. So then you're coming into the game, absolutely. So I think it's very also very much related. I think what we know also from other countries is obviously that there's a bit of back and forth between, let's say, the different institutions which exist in other countries and the companies as well, especially if there might be maybe open questions, right? Could be open question to maybe the clinical evidence or to the data package which was submitted. But this would also only happen within the evaluation committee process in more kind of informal way, right? That somebody would just come back and just say, look, I mean, we have some.
Yeah, I think the institute, which I mentioned, the Institute of the Evaluation Board, I think they will raise those questions with the manufacturer. Yeah. They usually write a small report to the subcommittee of the Evaluation Board to summarize their findings. And I think if they have open questions like this, then they would approach the manufacturer. And I think also, if in the subcommittee there are open questions, they probably will ask the institute to come back to the manufacturer and raise questions. At least once it has been in the evaluation board, we never had any contact to the manufacturer because all these things are settled, and it's very close then to the final decision already when it reaches the board itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So a bit of a final question around that kind of process. What is the kind of standard timeline within that? I mean, you mentioned a bit on the timeline. Obviously, if there's a companion diagnostic, I think that was very, very tight, I could imagine. But what about, let's say, kind of standard predictive diagnostics on average?
Well, the differentiation, again, is whether it's a new scientific method or not. Because if it's new scientific methods, then it needs a GBA evaluation, and that can take 3 years or so. Whereas if it's just a slight adaptation of an existing method, so it needs not to go through the GBA, but can be done within the evaluation committee itself, I think it should be done within a year.
Got you. Okay. And there, I mean, if you think about, I mean, you always say slight adaptation, but I mean, especially in the area of, let's say, medical devices, there could be maybe even kind of same kind of diagnostics, right? Same kind of devices. Would they also basically need to submit then to the evaluation committee and just say, look, we would like to use maybe an existing schedule without any kind of update, but is it more kind of reporting, and you would just say, yeah, or the evaluation committee would just say, yes, that's fine? Or would that basically be beyond any kind of further submission?
What's the idea? Making a different use of an existing device?
The idea is rather a bit, I mean, it's probably two different scenarios, right? One is you could have a diagnostic, and yes, you're right, maybe it was a kind of adaptation where you would say, look, I mean, we're now also analyzing maybe another kind of laboratory parameter, just imagine, right? So then you would obviously, it's more the kind of question, let's say, kind of, are we allowed, even though that we have already received a CE certificate for it? Or the other kind of scenario could be maybe something more like there is already a fee schedule, or let's say a fee available within the schedule, and we have now a diagnostic which is maybe measuring already a given parameter, but maybe just in another way, right? It's just another way how to measure it. Hence, we're just want basically the same amount of money which is already available. Would they just basically need to enter the market and just say, look, we're basically the same, you can use us? Or is that still, let's say, the way that they would need to, let's say, get confirmation that they can use the existing fee?
Well, first thing is by law and decisions of the federal court on social and health issues, the fee schedule has to be interpreted very narrow. Mm-hmm. This has been decided by the federal court several times. Therefore, the fee schedule position can only be used for exactly what's in it. Therefore, every thinking about, well, it's written for disease A, but we can also use it if the fee schedule physician, for instance, is mentioning disease A to do the test, then you cannot simply say, oh, we can use it for disease B as well, because, as I said, it has to be interpreted very narrowly. Therefore, everything which falls out of the existing fee schedule as it is has to needs a change of the fee schedule, which means either changing the wording of an existing fee schedule position or developing a new fee schedule position. And even with these things, I mean, the question then still is it a new scientific method? I mean, a diagnostic tool, we had this several times in cardiology in the last years, that a certain cardiologic diagnostic procedure was already used in a certain cardiovascular disease, and the German cardiologist wanted to use it in another cardiovascular disease, but this was not mentioned in the fee schedule. And then actually the decision was that's a new scientific method which GBA has to decide whether for this other disease also this method now is adequate. Therefore, it's a very narrow understanding.
Okay, yeah, that's it makes sense at the end of the day. I mean, absolutely great. I think we're already approaching a bit the end. I mean, you have a vast, let's say, experience, obviously, not only the evaluation committee, but obviously beyond that. But I mean, if we want to focus a bit, let's say, on diagnostics and companies around diagnostics, what would be your kind of recommendations if somebody would, let's say, come from outside of Germany and they would want to approach the German market? What would be the kind of key recommendation for these companies in order to be hopefully then also successful in Germany?
I think one of the first things really would be to find out whether what they want to do is seen as a new diagnostic method which needs GBA evaluation, because that's really the key differentiator. If this question is answered with yes, then you need totally different data requirements as if this question is answered with no. So that's a very, very key thing. And if a GBA evaluation is seen as necessary, and you actually can go to GBA and to the evaluation committee to ask for it, as I mentioned, the manufacturer is entitled to request. I didn't mention this. If the manufacturer is approaching GBA and evaluation committee whether his new diagnostic is a new method or not, he is entitled that he gets an answer within 3 months. Therefore, that's a short period, and therefore it will be dealt with on the next meeting after this application has been done. And if the answer is yes, then really I would so it's a new method, then I would strongly recommend that very early the manufacturer checks whether his data, which he has already produced or is going to produce, trial planning, stuff like that, would be sufficient to find GBA approval. That's, I think, really the most important thing. Find out very early whether you have a new scientific method in GBA thinking and evaluation board thinking or not, and then fit your data to these needs, because they are really different in case of a new scientific method than in case of just adjusting an existing scientific method.
Exactly. I would fully agree. I think that's the core, because that's basically the key differentiation if you basically go right or if you go left.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, absolutely crucial, because I think that's also the ultimate question, which kind of evidence you basically really need to deliver to the different institutions in that way.
Yeah, I mean, one more thing, maybe
Sure.
with general recommendations, I would contact, but probably the manufacturers do anyway. I would contact the relevant medical specialists which finally will use the equipment.
Yes.
Because, as I said, the evaluation board is 50% payers and 50% physicians, and the Federal Association of Physicians must become aware that there exists something, and because they internally have, of course, all these specialist societies, the cardiologists, nephrologists, internal medicine people, whoever. I think there should be awareness among these people that they think it's necessary to talk with the Federal Association of Physicians to make them considering a change of the fee schedule. I think if you just write a letter to the Federal Association and don't back it up with support by the specialists who would finally need this new diagnostic tool, that would be difficult.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's probably a general kind of recommendation for any kind of manufacturer. I mean, get the clinicians as a kind of backup. And if they don't see the need, I mean, why should the health system basically then adapt also their kind of full schedules? I'm fully with you. Absolutely. Very good. Jürgen, that was a pleasure again to speak to you. Thanks a lot for all of your insights.
Bye, Stefan.
Thank you, Jürgen. So, I mean, as we have just heard from one of the key experts also, but not only in terms of the evaluation committee, which is putting also the fee schedules together for diagnostic, it's very important to know which kind of, let's say, innovation or not a manufacturer basically has in their hands. Why is that important? Because as we have as well just learned and heard, the evaluation committee is especially looking for, maybe call it more kind of updates, and it's then just simply really taking also the kind of, let's say, standard kind of outcome parameters of diagnostics into account, which are especially sensitivity, specificity, and maybe kind of accuracy data for their decision making. That might take as well still a bit of time, and what we have as well heard is that there's a special institution which is also checking, that's another very important hint, how the German physicians would react to that new diagnostic, meaning also the association and some core clinicians, some core KOLs would need already to be backed up for the company. If the evaluation committee would not be the pathway to go because there is really a new and innovative diagnostic, and it's obviously very important, not a companion diagnostic, then the pathway would be to go through the so-called GBA, which is a joint federal committee, and they really focus quite clearly on the requirements of evidence-based medicine, which would require a randomized controlled trial versus the current German standard of care, whatever that is. I mean, it could be another diagnostic. It could still be kind of, let's say, watchful waiting, for example. It just depends what is currently being done in the German system. Very important beyond and besides the appropriate comparator for that randomized controlled trial is then also the outcomes parameter, which would need to be really hard endpoint. So patient relevant endpoint, which could be in some instances like in oncology, survival, or other endpoints which can be measured, which can really be, let's say, seen as well as a kind of impact for the patient beyond maybe even the kind of treatment changes. So there needs to be an impact seen for the patient and hence for the system as well. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.